Alright, so today we're starting the chamber orchestra series, and if you're not familiar with the genre, it's basically just an orchestra with one player to each part. So extremely reduced string section, still requires a conductor, but you would not worry about having the strings blend, for example, and this first piece we'll look at will be a pretty good example. I'm going to be listening to a piece by Philippe Leroux, which was composed in 2012, called Ailes, and this is the ensemble here. I'll try to be quick with it. The instrumentation is 1121, 1110, percussion, piano, 2-1-1-1 in the strings, or for the strings you could say 1-1-1-1-1. The flute has to double on bass, flute, and piccolo. The first clarinet has to double on a clarinet in A, which is tuned down a quarter tone, and the second clarinet has to double on bass. The trumpet has to double on piccolo trumpet in A, and the ordinary trumpet is in C because this is an orchestra. And the contrabass needs to have 5 strings. And then there's quite an extensive list of percussion. I believe it's just one percussionist. They have to play tam-tam, sandpaper block, wood block, squeero, kazoo, flexitone, vibraphone, whistle or like slide whistle, crotal, a rin, which is like a Japanese bell, and a bass drum. Then there's a few here which I don't know the French translation offhand, so just give me a second. And the percussion also has to play on a bird call, so like a bird whistle, one of those water whistles, and a crashel, which is a rattle, basically. So a lot of small percussion instruments and some bigger ones, just based on the instrumentation alone. I also forgot the bassoon is also doubling on contra. But from all these doublings and from the extensive percussion, you can probably already realize that Philippe Leroux is a spectral composer, and it's even clearer if you look at some of his performance notes. We got quarter tone accidentals and eighth tone accidentals. And then we have quarter tone plus an eighth tone accidentals, and the 2 different types of dynamics. So he uses quotation marks for let's see, prescriptively notated dynamics, and regular dynamics are just descriptively notated. And this is a very substantial piece. It was it's 27 minutes long, and here the recordings performed by the Maytar Ensemble at an Israeli conservatory in 2015. So that's the version we'll be listening to. A little bit about Philippe Leroux. I heard an entire concert of his works in Toronto in, I want to say, 2016 or 2015, and he is a French composer who has been living in Canada for a number of years, teaching at McGill University, and he's a very esteemed composer in terms of like Canada's new music scene. He was born in 1959, and I had I had one opportunity to meet him when I was looking at McGill as a potential school for my doctorate, but he was in ill health at the time I was visiting, so I didn't actually get to meet the guy, and it's a bit unfortunate because I was super into spectral music at the time, and I think it would have been very valuable to like get his opinion on what I was doing or trying to do, but it didn't really happen. He has studied with Pierre Schaeffer, Ivo Malik, Claude Balif, and he was teaching at IRCAM for 5 years before he moved to Canada. And he's been in Canada since 2011, so that would be, let's see, yeah, the past more than 10 years. He studied at the Paris Conservatoire, so that's sort of like a very important institution for McGill. I think McGill, their composition division at least, really models themselves after the Conservatoire and holds that institution in very high esteem. And you can imagine why, because Montreal gets a lot of funding for French culture. Okay, I think with that being said, we can get into this. If you're not familiar with spectralism, I've already done 2 episodes on Griset's music, and I think that's a pretty good primer for what we're about to listen to. I'm going to have a listen here, and I will report back in the second half. Again, the link to the recording that I'm listening to is in the description for the video. All right, so this was a very invigorating performance, and I'm excited. I'm now much more excited to get started on this series. The baritone here was actually performed by a soprano or mezzo-soprano, Ailes Janssens van Munster, and she did a fantastic job with this piece. Hopefully this recording gave you a sense of the size and scope that a chamber orchestra is, more or less. It's usually like 15 players, I think, is a good size. My thoughts on this piece, I think it's pretty old school in some of its like ideas and gestures. Like it feels like a first generation spectral piece, but it was written in 2015, and that's not to say that it's like dated or anything. There's definitely other ideas that are more unique to Leroux. Like I remember one of the pieces I saw of his live was for, I think, pianos and percussion and electronics. It was called M, and he talked about how interested he was in like the gesture of writing the letter M. And I think a lot of his pieces play with like graphic, like very simple graphical ideas as like a source for spectral composition, like as a compositional resource. And you can kind of see that in one of the main ideas of this piece, which is this like either quickly or slowly moving up and down scalar kind of, and the climax of the piece is based on this sort of very even up and down motion, this linear up and down motion, which gets developed a lot throughout the piece's runtime. And he tends to contrast that with this idea, which I think of as like a light switch idea, where there's like one chord or sound in the ensemble and it's just switched on and off, like a square wave, right? It's either all the way up or all the way down. And usually that idea has a lot of silence and the ensemble is out of sync with the singer. So there's at least that layer. And those two ideas never really come to overlap or anything. It's just like there's one idea that's like developing and very fleshed out and has all these different ideas, and then there's another idea that the singer keeps coming back to that I mean the timbre might change from one time to the next, but it as a gesture is completely static, and I think that's a really good compositional strategy. I was not able to find a translation of the text, unfortunately, but if you speak French and you were able to get things out of this recording, feel free to comment. I liked the light switch idea a lot. I liked the moments of either solo voice or voice with flute, um, contrasted with full ensemble stuff. And the sound in the last like 2 minutes of the piece was very colorful. He saved this like super colorful sound world for the very end, which I think was fun. And overall, I would say it's very indebted to Grisey, and it does have sort of this old school spectral sound to it. And I think a big part of that is how he chooses to use this ensemble. To be honest, this is not a genre that I've really gotten to know in great detail, so I think it'll be very educational for me. There just aren't a lot of chamber orchestras in Canada to begin with, and not a lot. I can't think of any that are devoted to contemporary music. Like the only context of like chamber orchestra new music like that I've seen in Canada is like when I was living in Toronto, the Esprit Orchestra would occasionally have a subsection of their ensemble play a chamber orchestra piece. So for the most part, this whole genre and world is like almost foreign to me, and I think this will be really good for me to get to know. So hopefully you are in a similar situation, and this will be a very educational series.